facing one of the biggest threats in human history.
Welcome to ASEAN People Speak, Season 4. I'm Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For our fourth episode, we're diving into a topic that's both urgent and critical as we explore how Southeast Asia is tackling the climate crisis and the transition to renewable energy. We will be joined by a dedicated public interest lawyer for communities affected by environmentally destructive projects and consumer groups advocating for clean and affordable renewable energy. She is currently the Deputy Executive Director of the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development, or CEED, a Philippine-based think-do institution seeking to advance transformative energy, ecological justice, and people-centered development. She is also a part-time lecturer teaching environmental policies and legal issues in development at the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, where she also received her degrees in political science and Juris Doctor and Master in Public Management and Energy Transitions track. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Attorney Avril De Torres. Hi, Attorney Avril. Good afternoon. And I believe you are also in the Philippines?
Hi, Reg. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm also here in the Philippines.
Great. So it's so nice to have a fellow Filipino again here in our podcast. And thank you so much for joining us today. We've been talking about climate justice and climate change for the past few episodes, but I think it's very timely that we're going to talk about climate reality, which is renewable energy and the road ahead. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, and we're so glad that you can share with us your insights. I guess we'll start off with our first question for our audience who are very much interested for this episode. What do you think, Attorney Avril, is the latest climate science reveal about Southeast Asia's vulnerability to climate change? And how do you think this would underscore the urgency to transition to renewable energy?
Regine, unfortunately, when we look at the latest reports on climate impacts, Southeast Asia remains as one of the most climate vulnerable regions in the world. And when we talk about climate impacts, there are different ways for us to look at these impacts. I guess the most common ones that we live through in our day-to-day lives are what we call the rapid onset ones, or the extreme weather events. If we look at reports from, for example, German Watch's Climate Risk Index, which looks into disasters, typhoons, extreme heat, and floods, this actually shows that in a span of 2 decades, around 5 Southeast Asian countries are part of the top 15 climate disaster-prone countries in the world. So imagine nearly 200 in the world, and we're in the top 15. So we have Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia in these top 15 list. But maybe another way that we experience and are starting to see climate impacts would be sea level rise. So reports show, like the one from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that compared to previous studies, sea level rise are predicted to be flooding thrice as much land as previously studied. No? So we have areas like Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, which are predicted to be flooded. Portions of those areas are predicted to be flooded by 2050. And we have countries
by
like our own Philippines by 2050.
Because of climate change. And this is such an alarming revelation, because it does not just affect one country, but a lot of countries. You've mentioned a while ago that in the 200, in that list that you mentioned a while ago, the top 5 all belong to the Southeast Asian region. And it's very, 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 very disturbing in a way. But I guess that is also the reason why we would have to shift our perspective into things when it comes to to the environment. And I think our audience is very much interested why we would like to underscore also the urgency to transition renewable energy here in Southeast Asia.
Yes, definitely, Reg. Just to also clarify, the five Southeast Asian countries there are part of the top 15 list
Oh,
of,
okay. I'm sorry.
climate
Yes. Okay.
disaster
Okay.
prone countries. And these are just some of the impacts that we are already feeling today. But I guess, one more example is with El Nino just concluding
Mhm.
recently, we've seen extreme temperatures. This is recorded to be the hottest year in history. So, and we are
Oh,
among those nations that are feeling the brunt of the heat.
yes. And usually this season would be would not be definitely a dry season, which is El Nino. This was probably supposed to be the wet season already, but we can see the transition when it comes to the seasons and the drastic changes when it comes to experiencing extreme temperatures, or at least the change when it comes to um, that part of the year which is usually cold, but now it's the hottest part of the year, or it's been recorded as the hot this year. 2024 is recorded as the hottest year, all because of climate change.
Yes. These are, unfortunately, the reports keep on saying unprecedented, unprecedented. But every year we just keep breaking the record. And for the Philippines, for instance, while climate negotiations were happening in Azerbaijan, we were hit by six storms in a row in just a matter of 30 days. And in just a matter of 11 days, we were hit by four storms. This is the new reality because of the worsening climate crisis.
Yes, and actually, just to add to that, it's interesting because some areas in the Philippines that do not usually flood are flooded, or the ones who are actually affected by these typhoons, not super typhoons, in fact, become flooded. And this is really indeed disturbing. But because of that, maybe yes, we can now talk about this, transitioning it now from the science reveal about Southeast Asia's vulnerability when it comes to climate change. Why do you think then it is important to transition to renewable energy?
I think, Rich, there are many reasons for us to transition to renewable energy, but the climate crisis is the foremost reason because as climate science predicts, we would be among the regions that would greatly be affected by the impacts of the
Mhm.
worsening climate crisis. And that's just an unfortunate reality that we have to face because the impacts today are caused by emissions 1 or 2 decades ago. And unfortunately, we're still not reducing emissions globally, at least not at the rate that's necessary for us to avert the worst of the climate crisis and to meet the goals under the Paris Agreement. But if we look at other benefits to transitioning to renewable energy, we'll find that renewable energy also, of course, prevents other environmental impacts.
Yeah.
Depending on the technology that we use, then we wouldn't have to suffer from increasing health risks due to greenhouse gas emissions or due to pollution from harmful effluents when we use fossil fuels. And of course, there are also benefits when it comes to affordability of electricity and reliability of electricity. Although, with regard to these different factors, it would really vary from country to country. But in our experience here in the Philippines, we find that renewable energy in from solar and from wind are actually, in fact, in many cases already more affordable than electricity from fossil fuels
Mhm.
and also
Mhm.
more reliable.
Yeah. So I like that you mentioned examples already of renewable energy here in the Philippines, but maybe you can also talk about, or you can share with us, where do ASEAN countries stand right now when it comes to transitioning to renewable energy? Now that you've mentioned the Philippines, what about other countries? Or are there policies or strategies that are helping us move forward? Or are there things also that are holding us back?
Rich, we actually released a report about Southeast Asia's energy landscape just a month ago. It's
Mhm.
entitled Southeast Asia at the Crossroads, and it's very promising. We found that Southeast Asia as a region has massive plans for renewable energy. We
Mm.
have nearly 400 gigawatts planned just for renewable energy. And if we compare that
Wow.
to the existing renewable energy capacity, that's actually quintuple or fivefold increase than what we
Oh.
currently have. And we say that this is extremely ambitious because if we look at one of the biggest outcomes of the climate negotiations last year, one of that is the tripling renewable energy capacity goal. And it's a
Mhm.
global target. It says that the entire world has to triple renewable energy capacity. And so when we look at Southeast Asia specifically, the plans that we have for renewable energy is already a fivefold increase, more than the target that was set last year. And
Yeah.
the countries that are leading when it comes to the planned projects are Vietnam and the Philippines. And to that
Mm.
point of what policies could be contributing to this, we know that Vietnam, when the decade turned early in the 2020s, they were actually leading when it comes to promoting different types of solar PV technologies. They were
Mhm.
granting
Yeah.
incentives, and there
Yes.
were differentiation when it comes to whether it's ground mounted or they're installed in rooftops, and that really gave the much needed push for more renewable investments and developments to come in. And for the Philippines, we've been having auctions specific only to renewable energy, and several other policies to promote renewable energy. And so we see the impacts now with more projects coming in.
That's so nice to know, and to think that the world, or at least the entire, during the negotiations in the last conference, it was just to 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 have renewable energy by three times more, but to think that we're doing it times five more than more than what we expect, or what we plan to actually have as negotiated and agreed upon in the last conference. Then that we're happy to know that we're compliant, and even more than that. But I guess another challenge, though this might be in a different sphere. We talked about policies. It's a different thing when it comes to implementation. So that might be something that we would have to see if it's being implemented very well in these countries, and also in other ASEAN countries as well. But maybe I'd like to also ask, many proposed fossil fuel projects in Southeast Asia are actually located in key biodiversity areas. And um, this is, you've mentioned a while ago, carbon footprint and the call to reduce carbon emission. What do you think are the environmental and social implications of these developments? And are there successful examples of opposition or mitigation when it comes to these things?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Reg, because although we are heading towards a promising trajectory when it comes to renewable energy development, we as a region still have massive plans for fossil fuels. So in the same report I mentioned earlier, we also looked into coal and fossil gas expansion. And unfortunately, we do have significant plans for those as well. So around over 170 gigawatts. So around half of the renewable energy planned for the region would be for fossil fuels as well. So it's important to talk about what we would describe as fragmented policies, wherein we try to promote renewable energy, but still have policies that at the same time incentivize other fossil fuels like coal and fossil gas. And when we look at the climate crisis, the goal should be to transition away from fossil fuels and not to
Yes.
promote renewable energy alongside fossil
Yes.
fuels. So when we look at impacts, to your question, of course, we have a lot of reports already that talk about impacts to water and air in terms of pollution, because burning fossil fuels do result in harmful byproducts. And of
Yes.
course, part of that would be greenhouse gases that worsen the climate crisis. In Southeast Asia, we have reports from Greenpeace that hone in on air pollution, and they would describe how much more premature deaths are expected when we continue to burn fossil fuels. So, for my country, which is where I'm most specific, where I'm mostly concerned
Based.
about, uh,
Yes.
the report finds that that would mean 27,000 premature deaths every year. That can be
Oh,
attributed to fossil fuel
because of fossil
burning.
fuels. That's
Yes.
a large number. That's a very, very large number.
It's a significant number, definitely. And now we're only talking about impacts to the health of people. What we have to actually also consider, Reg, is Southeast Asia is a very mega, well, it's a biodiverse region. Um, when we look at nearly 200 countries in the world, there are only 17 described as mega diverse, those countries that hold majority of the species in the world and have significant share in endemic species, so those species that can only be found in their own countries. So 3 countries are from Southeast Asia. That's Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And then we have more countries that host the Coral Triangle, which is described as the center of marine biodiversity in the world. And unfortunately, based on our research, many of the fossil fuel projects being proposed in our region are found in critical habitats or in biodiversity
Mm.
areas.
Well, when it comes to these things, then we want to know if yes, fossil fuels do produce a lot of harm in the environment, and there are a lot of key biodiversity areas where fossil fuel projects are being developed. But what do you think are there any successful examples or oppositions or mitigation when it comes to stopping, mitigating, or lessening the effects of these projects in these key biodiversity areas?
Yes, Rich. In fact, we have a very promising or hopeful effort that's happening starting in the Philippines, but has become a global campaign. It's called the Protect Verde Island Passage campaign. And essentially, it looks into specifically the VIP, or the Verde Island Passage, which is the center of marine shorefish biodiversity. So it's part of the Coral Triangle, and it's located in the Philippines, and encompasses 5 different provinces. And just to describe how rich this area of water in the Philippines is, in just a 10-kilometer area here, we can find over 1,700 different types of fish species.
Wow,
And
that's
then
a lot.
that's
In just 10 kilometer, in a 10 kilometer area.
area. Yes, in
Wow.
the Verde Island Passage, and it's home to the clownfish Nemo. It's home to critically endangered species like dugong and the hawksbill turtle. But unfortunately, when we look at fossil gas expansion in the Philippines, gas-fired power plants, liquefied natural gas terminals, the center of the expansion in the Philippines is happening in the Verde Island Passage. So a group
Mm.
of fisher folk organizations, environmental, non-governmental organizations, faith-based orgs have come together here in the Philippines to call for the protection of Verde Island Passage from different environmentally harmful activities, but that includes development of gas projects. And so far, one of the efforts that the campaign has been doing is talking to financial institutions in the US, in Europe, in Japan, who are funding these gas projects and informing them that they're actually involved in threatening globally significant biodiversity hotspot in the Philippines and asking them to stop funding these types of projects. So in just 2 years of this campaign, Reg, there are already 4 financial institutions who have committed to stop funding projects that would harm the Verde Island Passage, specifically gas projects.
Wow, that's very, very nice to know. I mean, that's very comforting to know. It means that, it's so effective to talk to, and they are being enlightened about these. I mean, the companies that are giving grants or financially aiding these projects are enlightened with the fact that it's not just about development and production and just producing enough energy for a specific region. It's not just about profit or development, or these things, but instead, it should also focus on the preservation and conservation of these key biodiversity areas. And that is also nice to know that there are 4 major companies already that have stopped financially aiding these projects. So congratulations on that. Are you also part of that campaign as well?
Thank you, Reg. Yes, my organization is part of the campaign, and I am among the delegates that fly to different parts of the world to talk to the financial institutions. But we're also very grateful that we're able to bring our fisherfolk leaders to those avenues, and so that they can themselves talk to the financial institutions and say how they've been experiencing the impacts of fossil fuel expansion. And we're glad that these types of activities have been making impact and have urged these financial institutions to divest from fossil fuels.
And it's nice to know, since we've talked about talking to these financial institutions. Maybe you can also share with us, because I've heard that you recently attended the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, as an observer. Maybe you can also share with us some things or the key takeaways that you have reflected upon or have encountered during your stay in Baku during the COP29, that especially with regard to ASEAN countries. And maybe you can also share with us what can the region leverage when it comes to these outcomes to accelerate our transition to renewable energy.
Yes, Reg. I was among the many civil society organizations that joined the climate negotiations just last month in Baku, Azerbaijan. And it's actually related to finance, because the climate conference this year is described as a finance COP, a conference of parties. It's a finance COP because this year the main negotiations centered on establishing a finance goal for climate action. Finance is important for climate action because a lot of the things that we want to achieve in terms of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, being able to adapt to the worsening climate crisis, and also receiving reparations from losses and damages caused by climate impacts, they're based on whether we'll get finance. We can have major plans for renewable energy, but if we don't have the investments for these types of projects, then it can be difficult for us to meet our own goals. So in this COP, many of the developing countries have come together to call for a very ambitious finance goal of 1.3 trillion US dollars per year from 2025 to 2030. 2035. Unfortunately, we are frustrated with the outcomes. What happened was, instead of receiving that final negotiating text, the final decision from the conference as obligating the developed nations, those who have historically benefited from emitting greenhouse gas emissions and burning fossil fuels, the commitment was only 300 billion US dollars per year, but it also did not limit that commitment to developed nations. It said that developed nations would lead this financing, which means that it can also come from other sources. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the demand is also for it to be public finance and mainly in the form of grants, which means that we don't want to be burdened with more debt because we are already paying for a lot of debt for different needs that we have. And unfortunately, there was no commitment for a majority of that financing to come from mainly grants based and from public financing. And in fact, we saw that a huge responsibility was being accorded to banks, which means more loans for us. And so it puts us as a difficult situation because countries like ours are still developing and we would need a lot of support when it comes to mitigating our emissions and transitioning to renewable energy, but also adapting to the worsening climate impacts that we're feeling today. But I guess if there's anything that puts a little bit of hope for us is that based on our findings, we as a region have the political will to promote renewable energy. Even when it comes to financing, we found that majority of the financing for renewable energy comes from domestic banks, so banks within our region. So we do have that will. We want to transition to renewable energy, although we are still distracted. That's the word that we use. We're distracted by fossil fuels. We still have fossil fuel plants. Anyway, the negotiations, that's an annual thing. We'll
Work on that.
it will work on that. And we know that the next climate conference, it won't be held in a petro state, meaning a state that's heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And we're hopeful that we'll get something more ambitious next year.
Yes, but you've summarized it very beautifully that despite I don't want to see it as a failure, but despite not getting that $1.3 trillion support coming from developed states, we are still hopeful because we have that political will when it comes to pushing for these things. And as developing countries, we also help ourselves when it comes to trying to fight or lessen fossil fuel projects and instead promote renewable energy instead. And I guess on that note, personally, Av, maybe you can share with us also your insights as well when it comes to negotiating, since you've mentioned Baku already, and you've talked about some key issues there, that it was held in a country that is petrol or is heavily reliant on
petro state.
Yes, on a petro state or heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And we are hopeful that by next year it will be hosted by another country which will not be that heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and it may be a different turnout. But you, as an observer in these conferences, what do you think can ASEAN regions take away and at the same time push for, other than financial contributions or financial reparations from developed countries?
Reg, something that I always say after attending climate conference and feeling jaded with the outcomes, is that
Yeah, you
the
can't
real
help feel but jaded. But
yes, because especially, in the past 3 years, the climate conferences have been held in petro-states. So it was Egypt, then the United Arab Emirates, then Azerbaijan, and these are countries that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And unfortunately, the presidents that were designated were, in fact, heads of different fossil fuel companies. So it's a very difficult situation there at the negotiation. So something that I always say, feeling a bit jaded from these conferences, is that the real fight happens in our own countries. And whether we allow more fossil fuel to come in, or we find ways to promote renewable energy in the different sectors that we work in, whether we're focusing on actual project installations, or we're focusing on policy reforms, or we're focusing on financing and making sure that financial flows go into renewable energy instead of fossil fuels, in the different ways that we fight to avert the worst of the climate crisis and push for renewable energy solutions. Those happen in our own countries. Those happen on the ground, not in the 2 weeks that we spend in the halls of climate negotiations. Although, of course, we understand the impact of having a text that binds us all when it comes to climate commitments, we know that much of the work, or the real work, happens outside of those climate conferences. So I guess that's something that gives us hope, and I hope that the work that we do in our own regions, in our own countries, continue despite disappointing outcomes in these types of conferences.
definitely, definitely. And people like you, we need more people like you who are very passionate about these things. And not on that note, Av, I just want to say thank you so much for all your insights. And maybe on this note, if you would like to share with us your organization or things that you would like to share to our audience so that they can keep in touch with you, or any other projects or campaigns that you would like to promote.
Yes, please follow us at Seed Philippines on Facebook, and you can also find our website, seedphilippines.com. You can look at our different reports that look into the power landscape, or the latest power developments in Southeast Asia or in the Philippines. And we're also part of the Protect VIP campaign. So you can follow at Protect Verde Island Passage, or at Protect VIP in different social media platforms. Thank you so much, Reg, for inviting me this afternoon at your podcast. Very happy to be here and share some of our work and insights.
We're very, very, very happy that you can join us, actually, Attorney Av. And we definitely learned a lot from you. You gave us so many things this afternoon. And I'm sure our audience is just so full of inspiration right now because of the things that you have shared and mentioned. So I think that's all for today's episode of ASEAN People Speak. Thank you all for listening. And thank you so much, Attorney Av, for joining us today. Join us again next week for another episode. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Spotify to stay updated and never miss an episode. You can also stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by following at WG ASEAN HRMEC. And you can also visit our website at aseanhrmec.org. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. And we hope to see you in the next few episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged. Bye.